So today, Taryn and I are going to be running through two methane measurement frameworks. In part one, we'll be talking about OGMP 2.0 and how measurement-based methane reporting, how continuous monitoring connects into that, along with a case study from an operator who's used the technology to achieve the level 5 gold standard. And in part two, Taryn will run through the MiQ certification and how differentiated low methane gas can contribute to a market signal for marketing purposes. So just conceptually, before we dive into each framework individually, this is kind of a useful rubric to how to think about these two programs. Firstly, what's really important to understand is that these voluntary methane initiatives are starting to really be operationally implemented throughout the industry, and operators are making substantial commercial investments into achieving and maintaining participation in these particular frameworks. On the OGMP side, this is really about reporting, measurement-based methane reporting specifically, and it's all about driving site-level measurement and comparing it through a process called reconciliation with bottoms-up inventories. We kind of think about this as the accounting system, the systematic way that you collect data and report your methane emissions. On the MiQ side, this is really about certification. It's the whole goal of MiQ is about enabling differentiated low methane intensity gas. And it requires a number of, operator-specific programs to calculate a credible methane intensity and verify that through time. This is kind of like the market label that your molecules get stamped with an MiQ grade, and for a buyer of your products, that can be a signal to them that you guys are doing the right thing. So going into part one here, we'll walk through OGMP 2.0 and how operators who are on this pathway can incorporate continuous monitoring into their program. We'll kind of go through what is OGMP 2.0, why producers are joining the program, and kind of how the multi-year reporting progression works. So what is OGMP 2.0? It's the Oil and Gas Methane Partnership, for those of you that may not know. It's a voluntary methane reporting and mitigation framework led by the United Nations Environmental Program. Over 160 companies have signed on to the program throughout the entire value chain, whether it's upstream production, processing, LNG liquefaction, or transportation of the molecules. And these 160 companies represent over 45% of global oil and gas production. So there seems to be quite wide adoption of this framework. The program itself is designed to move companies from generic emission estimates to more targeted source level and site level measurement based reporting. And ultimately, by better understanding emission profiles, oil and gas operators are able to focus or assess what sources of emissions are the most material and focus their efforts on cost-effective mitigation. Ultimately, this is really helping operators take a very systems-based approach to methane emissions measurement and mitigation, and by really getting the reporting dialed right in. So why are companies joining OGMP 2.0? There's a few reasons. I wouldn't call this list exhaustive, but it does help frame up some of the big reasons that companies are joining. So the first is really about providing confidence to regulators, investors, and the general public that oil and gas operators are managing emissions responsibly and towards disclosed targets. Many companies have publicly stated methane intensity goals by certain timeframes, and by having a transparent reporting framework, these operators are going to be able to show the stakeholders exactly what's happening. But specifically for investors, and this is key, is that poor methane control might be viewed as operational inefficiency or a regulatory risk, and so it's really about building confidence around investment, not just publicly reporting methane. Secondly, it's about opening new markets for saleable oil and gas products. EU markets in particular, along with technology hyperscalers, are preferring or are going to require low methane intensity products. So by reporting methane emissions in a very transparent and verifiable way, companies will be able to prove what their intensity is and open up these markets. And then finally, by applying just overall systematic framework to their methane emissions, OGMP 2.0 members are able to really systematize their assessment of what's material, what's not material, and target their mitigation efforts to the places where it'll have the most impact. Most importantly, methane not emitted can be sold for profit, and so emissions control will directly lead to an increase in revenue. So this is just a slide. This is kind of information that's available from OGMP directly, but I think it's important to just run through how the reporting progression works. When a company signs on to OGMP 2.0, they are committing to a multi-year journey of increasing granularity of measurements and reporting, depending on the level that they want to achieve. Level 1 and level 2 OGMP reporting is relatively simple. It's based on generic emission factors at the asset level. In OGMP, an asset can be an individual site, or it can be kind of a larger geographic area where there's similar production. But these estimates are really just for operators that are at the beginning of their journey, or might be appropriate for assets that are not material in the overall analysis. So I'll kind of leave those ones to the side. Many operators, and for most of you on this call, level 3 is really where most people kind of begin their journey. This is using generic source level estimates, and a source level in the case of OGMP is kind of referring to equipment types and groups directly. And it's very similar to kind of EPA subpart W reporting, although some of that bleeds over into level 4 as well. So that's a good comfort level of building up a bottoms up emission factor inventory. But most companies, when they join OGMP, they are trying to achieve level 4 and ultimately level 5 at the gold standard. So I'll talk a little more about level 4 here very specifically. This is starting to get into an operator specific bottoms up emission inventory using specific company specific emission factors, using statistical sampling in the field with handheld devices like a calibrated bag or high flow sampling, as well as operations activity factors, which might be things like tracking compressor blowdowns, or how often a valve is actuating. And so this is a more detailed bottoms up estimate. And then once we get into level 5, that's where site level measurements are layered into on top of those level 4 inventories. And we end up with a reconciliation process to really hone in on what your company's methane emissions are. So specifically for level 5, like I was saying, operators will be required to report all material sources at that level 4 standard using company specific source level emission factors and activity factors. They'll then incorporate site level measurements from collected using advanced methane technologies like satellites, aerial flyovers, drones, or continuous monitoring devices. And then they'll complete a process called reconciliation, where the two independent measurement modalities are compared. And the idea being is trying to understand the differences between those two and put into place a plan to kind of tighten them up over time. So what we see on the right-hand side here in the plots on top, this is an example of source level inventory in orange with the uncertainty bands around it, and the site level measurements in green with the uncertainty band in front of it. By comparing these two numbers and understanding where the deltas are, you can come up with an understanding of where they are and put into place a measurement program to bring them closer together through time. And what I really want to emphasize here is just that continuous monitoring can contribute site level measurements to support that level 5 reporting. So how does continuous monitoring contribute to that level? What we see on the screen here is just a screenshot of the Qube platform. This is for anybody on the call that's a customer of Qube. This is really where a lot of the operational work is being done on a day-to-day basis. But there are a few data streams here that I want to call out just to really connect the two ideas. So the first is just the emissions data itself, the site level measurements. The measurements are being collected 24 hours a day, and they can really be used twofold. The first is really characterizing the temporal variability, how emissions vary through time over the course of a year in alignment with the OGMP reporting season, as well as helping operators time-bound operational activities, which can even be useful for that level 4 activity factor reporting. The second is just the easy mapping of equipment in the Qube platform to OGMP source categories. Although site level measurements are kind of the main goal of level 5 reporting, having the data be easily sortable to kind of compare site level data down to the equipment group level or to the source level required by level 4 can add an extra layer of data analytics. And then finally, we do have some embedded reporting that allows things to be easily exportable into an annual metric tons of methane detected at a particular site or group of sites. All right, to wrap up the OGMP section here, I just have a quick case study that kind of shows how one operator we work with used continuous monitoring data to achieve the level 5 gold standard. We do work with several companies that have contributed continuous monitoring data into level 5 reporting. This process here is not prescriptive. There is a lot of flexibility for operators to kind of define their own program and ultimately report in a way that makes sense for them. But in this particular case, an operator deployed continuous monitoring technology with Qube across 35% of their sites in a single basin, covering a diverse set of facilities and production profiles. So this was kind of their statistical analysis of top-down site level measurements. So on the site selection front, like I said, they had 5 different facility generations, unique designs as they iterated through time, and based on not only the design, but also the production capacity. And included in that was a representative subset of newer, higher producing sites that typically may have more emissions associated with them just based on the production throughput. The second was the category mapping. So like I said, this particular operator mapped every single equipment source inside the Qube platform to an OGMP category to align those two data sets together. Thirdly, they spatially extrapolated emissions data from continuous monitored sites to non-monitored sites within each category to kind of take that across the entire asset. Fourth here, and this was a decision that the operator made, they did simulate what the emissions below the detection sensitivity of the Qube technology is, and they added those in as well. Different operators take different approaches to this particular piece, but in this case, this operator ran a full simulation. They used some data available in the Qube system to bound the uncertainty calculations for what it could be on the high side versus the low side versus the calculated number. And then finally, they completed that reconciliation of the level 4 inventories with the site level measurements from the continuous monitoring system. In this case, the uncertainty bars overlapped, and so the reconciliation was complete. But overall, this particular operator, they achieved the level 5 gold standard by using continuous monitoring data as a key piece of their overall submission. So that's OGMP and how CM kind of fits into that. I'll turn it over to Taryn here, and she will take over and talk about MiQ.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining this morning. As Andrew talked about earlier this presentation, where the OGMP 2.0 certification is the accounting system, the MiQ portion of this is now the market label for molecules of gas that are being certified and giving operators that grading system and the recognition then for all the work they're doing. So we'll run through this morning how this works, so what it is. So the certification program was developed by the Rocky Mountain Institute and Systemics, and this is just creating that market mechanism simply to just reward that low methane gas production. And so it's a framework. It's evaluating not only an operator's methane intensity, but also their company practices, and just a holistic view to give their gas molecules a grade using a scoring system ranging from A through F. And so each MMBTU of gas gets a certificate representing that methane performance, and then that's tracked in the MiQ digital registry. So this gives premium or preferential access to those buyers that are seeking that low emissions gas. And we're seeing that this aligns with the EU methane regulation and just with other company ESG expectations of moving towards this low methane gas. One of the big portions of this certification program is that it provides credible third-party proof of methane, that performance. And so it's not just that operator-stated ESG performance, it has that auditable component of it as well. So right now, MiQ is reporting that they have 28 billion MMBTU certified on the MiQ registry, 30 BCF per day of gas certified, and 129 audits. And so each of those certificates requires that audit process to be certified. So again, this is just creating that market recognition for the low methane intensity gas. And so why does this matter? So this is really about market differentiation. This isn't just compliance. MiQ certification is fundamentally creating a way to differentiate gas in the market based on that methane performance, which is something that didn't necessarily exist before. So under this program, gas becomes graded, it's not commoditized, and what we're seeing is that buyers, particularly on the LNG and the European buyers, they're starting to care, and we're seeing those signals of price premiums or preferred access through programs such as these. And so these buyers need that credible third-party signal to know what the footprint of a methane molecule of gas is and what it actually is, and that's done then through the certification program. And it's beyond just that self-reported ESG claim. So it's creating that common standardized signal across operators for them to use, for buyers to use credibly. And so what we're seeing is that the transparency is really expanding beyond just the buyers. This is becoming more relevant for investors and regulators. We're seeing that investors are looking at methane risk and just overall performance. And then regulators are moving towards more of that measurement-based requirement. So talking about measurement-based reporting in OGMP 2.0, this is just that certification to say, yes, that's been done, and this is a low methane molecule of gas. And so certification ultimately helps operators stay ahead of both of these. And so really what we're seeing with any of these voluntary initiatives, the real goal here is to drive operational change. And so this isn't just labeling performance, it's actually designed to improve it. And operators move towards, if they start on a particular grade, they can move up to a higher grade of gas as they continue to implement different policies, additional technology, and just are ultimately reducing that methane intensity of their gas. And so just one of the things to note with MiQ is that it can be done on a portion of assets, but really this encourages operators to scale those best practices across their asset bases as they continue to grow and continue to improve on their methane practices. And so this is where continuous monitoring can become critical. You can't differentiate or certify or improve your performance without having that actual credible ongoing measurement, and continuous monitoring helps operators do just that. So the MiQ certification program has 3 pillars. The first is what we call methane intensity. So ultimately just the the methane emissions per unit of gas produced, either for gas or petroleum operations. I won't get into all the grading here, but an A grade specifically has a less than or equal to 0.05% methane intensity. So just as a reference there, there's a full scoring rubric that goes into this, and each of the pillars have their own scoring components. So methane intensity is the first. The second is company practices. So this is just the detailed review of the protocols, operational protocols that an operator has in place to ensure those controls. So that can include just their measurement policies, their LDAR practices, any maintenance programs, and just ongoing emissions management in general, what those practices are. And then the third component is what MiQ refers to as the monitoring technology development, or MTD. So this is the component that ensures that emissions are actually being measured. This can include a whole host of multiple layered technologies, continuous monitoring being one part of those. And all three of these elements are verified through an independent third-party audit. And so before certification is granted, all of the pillars and all of the components have to go through that audit, through that scoring rubric, and then that obtains a gas grading between A and F. And so right now, MiQ is noting that just less than 80% or 79% of their gas certificates are A grade, again, with the ability for operators to move through that grading system. And so how Qube fits into this, we fit into the monitoring technology development, as well as being able to help operators calculate their methane intensity. Operators can achieve a higher score with either more frequent LDAR scans or with the use of continuous monitoring on their assets. And so MiQ has a list of approved technology vendors. Qube is one of those. There's many different technology suites as well, providers for this third pillar here. So MiQ explicitly evaluates how operators are monitoring, and it's not just whether they have LDAR programs in place, but whether they actually have ongoing visibility into their emissions. And so that monitoring technology development is really one of those core pillars. Continuous monitoring can help companies strengthen that score, moving beyond just doing snapshot periodic-based approaches and having that continuous data in between. So that continuous monitoring can help unlock and really be defensible with measurement-based data, not just those bottom-up estimates. And so that helps in supporting the methane intensity calculations. And just with emissions being so temporally variable, having the ability to understand when intermittent emissions are occurring, short duration events, being able to capture events when they happen, not just necessarily when they're surveyed. And then it also reduces reliance on just those emission factors, having that measurement-based approach. Pardon me. So for the certification program, it's not enough just to simply say that emissions are low. You actually have to prove it with that auditable data. And so continuous monitoring can help with that. It can provide that time-stamped detection for records. When did an emission start? When did it end? The documented response, if there was any repair actions associated with an emission event, and then just gives operators a stronger position during those third-party audits to have the data to back up all of their events. And so part of this, the benefit of these programs, it's really the strengthened operational response. So it's not just the reporting of emissions. This is really how operators are managing their day-to-day emissions, responding to events quickly, especially those large impactful events, being able to reduce those, and then just having that continuous improvement loop is a real benefit of these programs. So what we're seeing is a real alignment of operational efficiency from operators, emissions reduction, and then using that layered technology approach for their certification. A large part of them are using this continuous monitoring as part of that continuous improvement loop as well. So this is just a bit of an operational workflow. We're seeing that methane management isn't just a set of disconnected activities. It's a really continuous operational system with a closed loop workflow. So it would start with continuous monitoring across assets. And again, for MiQ certification, this can be a portion of assets, scaling into larger portions of that as an operator grows within the voluntary program. This is really giving visibility into what's actually happening in the field. And so then detection is ultimately driving action. So find emissions quickly, fix them quickly, gives that visibility into rapid detection, and then that faster response on large events. And so then as these detections are coming or being collected, all of that measurement data is supporting those methane intensity calculations, and emissions inventory is moving beyond those estimates. And then all of this activity is brought into a structured auditable record. This is a real key part of this. Obviously, with the certification program, you have to have that backup data to be able to show what's been done, show what's been emitted, the when and the where. This is really critical. And then having that traceability for the certification program. And so that's what ultimately supports the certification, but it really doesn't stop there. So the certification loop is this closed loop. It drives continuous feedback. It's not a one-time achievement. Ultimately, it's a measurement-driven cycle of improvement. So we're seeing operators can really use the data, understand, and then get better as they're moving towards these cycled with a layered approach for multiple technologies. So we're seeing a lot of movement from the U.S. operators where a lot of the MiQ certification programs initially started in U.S. basins. This has moved now into more international markets, both on offshore upstream operators and then midstream companies as well, just across the full value chain. And so notably, I like to mention this, it's exciting for Canada. Canada's largest natural gas producer just last month announced their MiQ certification. And so it's just exciting to see other markets gaining traction in some of these voluntary initiatives. We're seeing more of a shift towards this internationally, which is great. And so having that MiQ certification, it's driving a shift towards hybrid monitoring architectures as well. It's no longer just this single technology kind of platform. We're seeing that there's a combination of technologies that operators can choose depending on what works best for their assets. And so those can all be used and given different point scoring within the rubric system for their certification. So that can include continuous monitoring, those periodic surveys as part of a traditional LDAR program, layering and aerial surveys, drone or satellite data for more basin-wide coverage, and then still having those engineering and inventory methods to have that methane-based performance from the bottoms-up side of things as well. So some of the key takeaways here, we're really seeing that the industry is shifting from just emission estimates using emission factors to more of a measurement-based approach for frameworks such as OGMP 2.0 and these MiQ certification programs. And so we're seeing that as certified gas markets are emerging, buyers are really wanting that traceable, low methane intensity gas with that auditable performance. And so these programs are really helping operators do just that. So we're seeing that operators that are implementing, continuous monitoring as a suite of technology, they're combining that with their measurement-based inventories and then having that third-party certification, they're really well positioned to move through either meeting or exceeding regulations that are coming into play or existing currently. Having access to those differentiated gas markets is a real incentive for companies that are looking to really prove their performance and then be given credit for that. And then just having the backup data, the performance data for the creditable audit trails, that's a big component of these programs as well. Lots of information. As we noted, we're not doing specific questions, but we'd love to hear from you if this is something that you're interested in talking more to either Andrew or myself about, whether that be OGMP 2.0 or the MiQ certification process, how we can help you develop a program that's best suited for your company. So looking forward to hearing from anyone that's interested in reaching out. Thanks everyone for your time this morning, and have a wonderful rest of your day.